Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Punjabi Hari, Jaya Rama Jaya Punjabi Hari, Jaya Hare
18, text 55, which is on page 838 in my book. You've got copies now, haven't you? Oh. So everybody got that? Bhaktyamam abhijanati
Bhaktyamam abhijanati
Yaganyas jasmi tatpataha
Yaganyastasmi tattvataha
Tato mam tatpato gyatva
Tato mam tattvato jnatva
Vishate tadanantaram
Vishate tadanantaram
Bhaktyamam abhijanati
Bhaktyamam abhijanati
Yaganyas jasmi tatpataha
Yaganyastasmi tattvataha
Tato mam tatpato gyatva
Tato mam tattvato jnatva
Vishate tadanantaram
Vishate tadanantaram
Bhaktyamam abhijanati
Bhaktyamam abhijanati
Yaganyas jasmi tatpataha
Yaganyastasmi tattvataha
Tato mam tatpato gyatva
Tato mam tattvato jnatva
Vishate tadanantaram
Vishate tadanantaram
Bhaktya
Bhaktya
by pure devotional service
by pure devotional service
Mam
me
me Abhijanati
Abhijanati
one can know
one can know
Yavan
Yavat
as much as Yacha as me
Yachasmi
as I am
as I am
Tatpataha
Tattvataha
in truth
in truth
Tataha
Tataha
thereafter
thereafter
Mam me
me
Tatpataha
Tattvataha
in truth
in truth
Gyatva
Yatva
knowing
knowing
Vishate
Vishate
he enters
he enters
Tat anantaram
that
thereafter.
thereafter
Translation: one can understand me as I am, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, only by devotional service. And when one is in full consciousness of me by such devotion, he can enter into the kingdom of God. Please repeat. One can understand me as I am,
one can understand me as I am
as the Supreme Personality of Godhead,
as the Supreme Personality of Godhead
only by devotional service.
only by devotional service.
And when one is in full consciousness of me
And when one is in full consciousness of me
by such devotion,
by such devotion,
he can enter into the kingdom of God.
he can enter the kingdom of God.
Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, and his plenary portions cannot be understood by mental speculation or by the non-devotees. If anyone wants to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he has to take to pure devotional service under the guidance of a pure devotee. Otherwise, the truth of the Supreme Personality of Godhead will always be hidden. As already stated in Bhagavad Gita 7.25, Naham prakasha sarvasya, he is not revealed to everyone. No one can understand God simply by erudite scholarship or mental speculation. Only one who is actually engaged in Krishna consciousness and devotional service can understand what Krishna is. University degrees are not helpful. One who is fully conversant with the Krishna science becomes eligible to enter into the spiritual kingdom, the abode of Krishna. Becoming Brahman does not mean that one loses his identity. Devotional service is there, and as long as devotional service exists, there must be God, the devotee, and the process of devotional service. Such knowledge is never vanquished, even after liberation. Liberation involves getting free from the concept of material life. In spiritual life, the same distinction is there, the same individuality is there, but in pure Krishna consciousness. One should not mistakenly think that the word Vishate enters into me, supports the monist theory that one becomes homogeneous with the impersonal Brahman. No. Vishate means that one can enter into the abode of the Supreme Lord, in one's individuality, to engage in his association and render service unto him. For instance, a green bird enters a green tree not to become one with the tree, but to enjoy the fruits of the tree. Impersonalists generally give the example of a river flowing into the ocean and merging. This may be a source of happiness for the impersonalist, but the personalist keeps his personal individuality, like an aquatic in the ocean. We find so many living entities within the ocean if we go deep. Surface acquaintance with the ocean is not sufficient. One must have complete knowledge of the aquatics living in the ocean depths. Because of his pure devotional service, the devotee can understand the transcendental qualities and opulences of the Supreme Lord in truth. As it is stated in the 11th chapter, only by devotional service can one understand. The same is confirmed here. One can understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead by devotional service and enter into his kingdom. After attainment of the Brahma-Bhuta stage of freedom from material conceptions, devotional service begins when one's hearing about the Lord. When one hears about the Supreme Lord, automatically the Brahma-Bhuta stage develops, and material contamination, greediness and lust for sense enjoyment disappears. As lust and desire disappear from the heart of a devotee, he becomes more attached to the service of the Lord, and by such attachment he becomes free from material contamination. In that state of life he can understand the Supreme Lord. This is the statement of Srimad Bhagavatam also. After liberation, the process of bhakti or transcendental service continues. The Vedanta Sutra 4.1.12 continues this. Aprayanat tatrapi dristam. This means that after liberation, the process of devotional service continues. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, real devotional liberation is defined as the reinstatement of the living entity in his own identity, his own constitutional position. The constitutional position is already explained. Every living entity is a part and parcel, fragmental portion of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, his constitutional position is to serve. After liberation, this service is never stopped. Actual liberation is getting free from misconceptions of life. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So good evening everybody, welcome to our program. I'd like to thank Chaitanya Balaprabhu for asking me to say something on this verse this evening. He's given me plenty of time, so I don't have any excuse for giving a weak class, although I can't give any guarantees. But anyway, this particular verse, one can understand as I am as a Supreme Personality of Godhead only by devotional service. And when one is in full consciousness of me by such devotion, he can enter into the kingdom of God. So this is a very important verse in the Bhagavad Gita because, again, Krishna is emphasizing bhakti, he's emphasizing devotional service. And he also mentions this, also talks about this in the 11th chapter, 54. That only by undivided devotional service can I be seen standing here before you and thus be seen directly. Only in this way can you enter into the mysteries of my understanding. So earlier on in the conversation, Arjuna asked Krishna to reveal his universal form. Even the universal form, Krishna says, it's not easily seen by anybody. But then he reveals, he transfers himself into the four-armed form and then into the two-armed form. So he emphasizes only by devotional service can anybody see this two-armed form. It's very, very confidential. In Krishna consciousness, obviously, when we come to Krishna consciousness, we want to know what the goal is. What's the purpose of Krishna consciousness? The purpose of Krishna consciousness is to link ourselves with the Supreme. It's to revive our relationship with Krishna. It's to get to know him. It's to love him and to render service. Bhakti or devotional service is emphasized throughout the Gita. There are different sections of the Gita, like the first 6 chapters, the middle 6 chapters, and the final 6 chapters. In the purport of the first verse of this chapter, Srila Prabhupada gives a delineation of what those different those sections are about. And throughout he talks about devotional service being in all of them. Of course, we can understand that Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, they're discussed to some extent in the Bhagavad Gita. but devotion is emphasized throughout. That's the point. So Krishna is saying that he can only be known in truth by that. Obviously there are other methods to try and understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. People try some in many ways, by pious activities, by meditation, by speculation, by studying the scriptures, all these different ways. And one may get some kind of partial understanding or partial realization of the absolute truth in that way. But he won't be known in truth. And Krishna, in this particular verse, he mentions the word tatvata twice in this particular verse. You can only know me in truth by performing devotional service. So, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada also clarifies that devotional service has to be performed under the guidance or the guidelines of a bona fide spiritual master. And he's talking about pure devotional service here. What does it mean, pure devotional service? What is pure devotional service?
Pure service without expectation of gain anything.
Okay. Expectation of anything else?
Without jnana, karma.
Yes, without gyan, karma, yeah, that's right. Those things, without material desires. Rupa Goswami says in the Nectar of Devotion, Anyasi Labhirasim, Jnana Karma Varavita, that devotional service should be performed without any material desires, any fruitive activities, any mental speculation or desire for monism to merge like that. And that it has to be continuous in that sense. It's constant. Pure devotional service is constant. So, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada again, he emphasizes that, he explains rather, that Krishna is not revealed to anyone. Naham prakasha sarvasa yogamaya. That he says earlier on that I'm never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent. Why? Because he's covered by Yoga Maya. He has to be covered by Yoga Maya because when the living entities come into this material world, they don't want to know Krishna. Therefore, he has to give them the illusion of separation. Also in the 7th chapter it mentions that there are 4 different kinds of persons that don't surrender to Krishna. The Mudhas, the Narada, Maya, Parita, Gyan and Asuras. So the Mudhas, you say these are like beasts of burden. They simply work hard and play hard. That for them is like there's no other consideration that there may be anything higher than life than in their small little sphere of activity. Prabhupada likens them to an ass. He says that the ass works for a master for a bundle of grass at the end of the day. He works all day. We don't have, in India you can see, they carry huge loads. I don't know how they manage, they carry massive loads. And Prabhupada says they're given a bundle of grass at the end of the... What did he say? The donkey could get it on the side of the road. He could get grass, but he thinks he has to work. So Prabhupada also says about human beings, sometimes they work for... They said sometimes they suffer from indigestion, they have ulcers, they can't even eat. Some people work so hard. Just like, for example, in America, it's not uncommon for people to have like 3 jobs, just to keep going like that. So these are the Mudhas. And in Narada, it talks about people who are addicted to low-class activities, sinful activities, that their vision is clouded by that they can't gain any kind of spiritual understanding or spiritual vision because of that, of those activities. And then Maya Paritar Gyan, Prabhupada says this refers to learned persons, like scientists and philosophers and people like that, people in the academic profession perhaps, who are very proud of their own knowledge. And that's the point. That sometimes when someone gets a little bit of knowledge, then they are proud of that, and therefore they can't learn. And then finally, asura, those persons who are atheistic, people who don't believe in God, who seriously don't believe in God. I mean, practically speaking, I used to call myself an atheist, but I wasn't really. I was an agnostic. I didn't know. There are some people who are seriously against religion and spirituality, and these people will never come to any proper understanding of God. They'll be against it because of what God stands for and what religion stands for, what the rules and regulations stand for. They don't want those things. They don't want it to interfere with their own personal enjoyment. So yes, Krishna doesn't reveal himself to those persons who are materially engrossed. I remember one time watching a Bollywood film. I don't generally watch Bollywood films very much, but there was this one on this man. He was a gross materialist, but he was an atheist. He didn't believe in Krishna, but Krishna appeared to him. He kept appearing to him and trying to convince him that he existed. You see. This is ludicrous, really, because Krishna, as he says, he never manifests himself. Krishna's in the heart. He's there in the heart. We can't see him in the heart, but he's present and he wants us to turn our attention towards him in the heart. But he doesn't personally manifest himself to all and sundry like that. So you have to be distinctly qualified to be able to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Prabhupada also, he's critical of people who try to understand God by speculation. He says that they use their tiny brains. What can we really understand? That the Supreme, as we understand from Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, he's infinite. He's ever expanding. He's beyond the universe. He manifests unlimited universes. How can you understand something like that simply by your own intellectual, mental prowess? It's impossible. Krishna is known as Adhokshija. He's beyond the realm of the senses and the mind. Like that. So, even erudite scholarship is not sufficient, even study of the Vedas. Krishna also says in 1153 that he's not known by those who study the Vedas. His form can't be seen by those who study the Vedas. Those who are very scholarly, even within the realm of the Vedas. Because Prabhupada here, he says university degrees are not helpful. So some of us, we have, educational qualifications. The point that Prabhupada is making here is that with that kind of qualification or that kind of intellectual understanding, it doesn't allow you to understand Krishna. It doesn't mean if you have these things that you are barred from understanding Krishna. That's not what it means, like that. But it doesn't mean that it automatically makes you qualified to understand everything in the world or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It doesn't in that sense. Of course, there's the example we have in the Chaitanya Charitamrita of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who was very concerned because he met Lord Chaitanya, because Lord Chaitanya went to the Jagannath Puri temple and he was in such ecstasy that he fainted. So they didn't know what to do. So they called for Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and he had this little swab And he said because they thought he was dead, they thought he passed away. And he's breathing, but he said this is bhava, this is ecstasy. So he took Lord Chaitanya back to his house and looked after him. But he was very concerned because he thought, well, this man is a sannyasi, and he's very young and he's very handsome. How will he keep up the sannyas ashram? So he was concerned about him, and he said to Lord Chaitanya, I think you should listen to Vedanta. Come and listen to the Vedanta. So he invited Lord Chaitanya to his house, and he spoke Vedanta for 7 days. And so Lord Chaitanya listened to Sarvabhauma, and he didn't say a word for the whole 7 days. So after he finished, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya said, well, I've been speaking for 7 days, and you haven't made any comment, you haven't asked any questions at all. So, what do you think about my presentation? Can you understand everything? He says, and Lord Chaitanya said, I can understand what you said, but I can't understand the meanings that you have given to the words of the Vedanta Sutra. He said, because the words of the Vedanta Sutra are crystal clear, but you've twisted the meaning to become impersonal. And Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was defeated. I mean, he was the pandit for the Jagannath Puri temple. He was renowned as a great pandit. But he felt defeated by Lord Chaitanya because his explanations of the scriptures were not acceptable. And he understood that they were incorrect. Because he didn't have the bhakti. Later on, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, I think, whenever he heard the word mukti, he would scratch it out and put in bhakti instead. He couldn't tolerate hearing the word mukti. So, in the 10th chapter, Krishna says, Tesham satata yuktanam bhajyatam priti purvatam didami buddhi yogam tam yenamam priyanti te. To those who are constantly devoted to me and worship me with love, I give them the understanding by which they can come to me. Krishna consciousness is actually quite straightforward. Do the devotees here remember Tribhuvanath Prabhu? You heard of Tribhuvanath? He was a great preacher. He passed away about 20 years ago now. Yes, it's a long time. But he used to do festival programs in Glastonbury and also in Africa as well. He was a very enthusiastic preacher and a great kirtan leader. But he quoted Prabhupada at one time as saying, Prabhupada said that Krishna consciousness is so simple that you can miss it. Like that. So it's performing devotional service. That's what it is. But obviously, how you do that, we need guidance in that regard, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But it means to develop. It means to develop spiritual intelligence. That's the point. And anybody can gain that. It doesn't matter what background you're from, whether you're from an academic background, whether you're from a poor background, rich background, whether you're born in this country, that country. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever. It means that you develop the understanding that you're a servant of Krishna. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. In the previous verse, Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma Nasochati Nakanchati Sama Samveshi Bhute Shemad Bhaktim Lavate Param. Krishna says, one who is thus transcendentally situated at once realizes the Supreme Brahman and becomes very joyful. He never laments or desires to have anything. He's equally disposed towards every living entity. In that state he attains pure devotional service unto me. So, becoming one with the Supreme. Krishna talks about that in that verse. But the point of becoming one, again, is that in that state he attains pure devotional service to me. So, according to the impersonalists, becoming one means to merge into the Supreme. It means to become, as Prabhupada says in the purple, homogeneous. That there's no difference between the living entity and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Prabhupada, he rejects that philosophy. And he says that being one with the Supreme, ultimately speaking, in the realm of Krishna consciousness means that you don't lose your identity. He says that in devotional service, the Supreme is there, the devotee is there, and devotional service is there. And if one is practicing those things in a neophyte stage, when one comes to the point of liberation, that the devotional service, it continues after that. If one has perfected one's life, at the end of his life, then the devotional service continues, the individuality continues, the relationship continues with the Supreme. Some practitioners, they use devotional service like as a stepping stone. They worship the deity sometimes, with a view to becoming higher. That they have, so we need a visualization of the Supreme in the deity form, so we worship that. But then afterwards we can dispose of the deity and then we can realize the Brahman, like that. So there's different misconceptions about these kind of things, and of course the misconception that the deity is non-different from Krishna. That's what we understand. Prabhupada says that the deity is a bona fide means whereby one can serve the Supreme Lord, and that again you can develop a relationship with the deity in the same way as you can develop a relationship with the original Supreme Personality of Godhead. So people have misconceptions about the deity, about devotional service, about devotees as well. It just reminds me of a story that was in a book called The Servant of the Servant by Tamal Krishna Goswami, because he was in the Radha Damodar party. This was a fired-up preaching party who had 3 Greyhound buses, and they would travel around the United States preaching. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj, I believe, was in charge of that party along with Vishnujan Swami. So anyway, one time they were parked up in a caravan park, and it was in the evening time, and suddenly they saw all these flashing lights and sirens going on. It was getting louder and louder. And then there was this banging on the door of the buses, so the devotees didn't know what was going on. It was the police. So the devotees opened up the door and they said, well, what's going on? And the police said, well, we've just had a panic call from the caravan park owner, because he said he's just seen 2 small children being set on fire by a bunch of bald-headed Martians. So the devotees had to explain to the police that they had been performing arti to Radha Damodar. They'd been offering a ghee lamp. So the caravan owner thought that they were burning children in the caravan park. But so that's what you can see. So there's so much misconceptions about what devotees are, what deity worship is, what devotional service is, like that. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says that liberation means to become free from the material concept of life. So what is that? What's the material concept of life? Does it mean I see myself as the servant and the servant of the servant? No? Yes? No? What is the material concept of life?
You're the body, you're the enjoyer,
Yeah.
you're the controller.
Anything else?
Whose
is this?
Mine.
It's mine. It belongs to me, yeah.
I, me, and mine.
I, me, and mine, yeah. What about our existence? Eternal? Eternal, is it? Is that what we think in material consciousness? No, we think we're temporary. Is there life before this? Life after? We don't know. We don't know. We think probably not. I was reading an article by a musician the other day, and he was asked, what do you think there is after death? He said, oblivion. That's pretty common. That's a pretty common understanding for people, and it's very stark. And just like really the impersonal philosophy of becoming homogeneously one or becoming void, it's very stark and barren. You know, it doesn't really give you anything positive. And that's the difference between that philosophy and Krishna consciousness, because in Krishna consciousness, after this body, if we perfect our lives, then we develop a spiritual body, like that. And we have life, we have activities, we have relationships, all those different things. There's love there. So, Krishna says in this particular verse that when one is in full consciousness, he can enter into the kingdom of God. Full consciousness, I was thinking about this earlier on, and it refers me back to a verse, if I can get it, which is in the 8th chapter, text 9. And these are just some things that might be useful for us to think about when we think about full consciousness. This is on page 423. One should meditate upon the Supreme Person as the one who knows everything, as he who is the oldest, who is the controller, who is smaller than the smallest, who is the maintainer of everything, who is beyond all material conception, who is inconceivable and who is always a person. He is luminous like the sun, and he is transcendental beyond this material nature. So this here gives a lot of the qualities of Krishna. Someone who is advanced in Krishna consciousness, he will understand, and he will be able to perceive all these things. So, again, in the verse, Krishna says, Vishate. He actually says he enters into me. Of course, in the translation, Prabhupada says he can enter into the kingdom of God, which actually, it's not actually in the translation. But Prabhupada, he puts it in there to avoid a misconception. Again, that one would think that you just merge within the body of Krishna, rather than that you attain Krishna's association and you live with him in the same abode, Salokya. One of the perfections of devotional service is to live on the same planet. So Krishna lives on a planet. He's not suspended in a void. He has his own planet, like that. So Prabhupada again, he discusses this thing about merging by using a couple of analogies in the purport about the green bird going into the green tree. He says when a green, like a parrot, you see a parrot goes into a green tree, he says it's not that the parrot has lost its life or it doesn't merge into the tree. It goes into the tree and it enjoys the fruit. It maintains its body, it maintains its personality and individuality that way. And also he talks about the rivers going into the ocean. Because very often the impersonalists, they use that analogy for liberation or for perfection in life, that we're like rivers into the ocean. The thing is, when you think about it, we're not rivers at all, are we? I mean, you know, we're people, we're individuals, we're living entities who have thinking, feeling and willing. Like that. We have form, we have form. Like that. So, Prabhupada, very often when anybody would come up with that example, he said, I wonder why they keep using all these hackneyed examples to come up with. But here he explains, even using that analogy, that even if you have surface acquaintance with the ocean, it still doesn't mean that you understand everything that is going on there. He said, rather, if you dive deep into the ocean, then you will become in contact with all the different aquatics there. So with these examples, Prabhupada is emphasizing that through Krishna consciousness or devotional service we can get proper knowledge, and also that we can gain happiness as well. Like he was using the example of the green parrot. You could have said, oh, the green parrot sits it, but he said, no, he enjoys the fruit there. So when we go to Vaikuntha, the Vaikuntha planets, they're not a penitentiary, they're not further prison. There are places of incredible happiness and joy, bliss, ananda. So they are places of factual enjoyment. Most people are not aware of the spiritual world or the Vaikuntha planets at all. We have ideas of heaven or paradise. Very often these places are seen as, there's not very many descriptions of these places, what really goes on there. And they may be seen as some kind of reward for pious activities. But not that they are our home. But this is what Krishna is saying to us. He said that abode is not illuminated by the sun, by fire or electricity. When one goes there, one never comes back. Krishna, he reveals the Vaikuntha planets to Brahma in the beginning of creation. And Brahma, he explains in the Bhagavatam what he's seeing there. The inhabitants, he said they look like lightning. You know, they're very effulgent. They have the same colour as Vishnu, the same blackish blue colour, and all the ornaments as well. And they say they're very handsome. They're very beautiful, like that. So most people are unaware that this place existed. They may think it's imaginary, but in the Bhagavatam, the Vaikuntha planets, attainment of the spiritual world, these are described as factual, not that they're just made up. Vyasadeva was a great sage. He could see right into the future. He foretold the advent of Buddha. He foretold the advent of Kalki, which is to come in another 427,000 years. He was a great seer. He had no business making up stories about things. So Prabhupada says that when we develop the Brahma Bhuta stage, that when we become liberated, then material contamination, it disappears. On a practical level, it means that our lust and greed diminishes, because those things, lust, anger and greed, they're very prominent in the consciousness of conditioned souls. Particularly lust, Krishna talks about it earlier on, karma, isha, krodha, isha. Arjuna asks, what is it that when sometimes I'm forced to do things that I don't want to do? Krishna says it's by lust only. Lust means the intense desire for sense enjoyment, attachment to bodily pleasure. So, the point is that Krishna, when one is absorbed and engaged in Krishna consciousness fully, then he loses a taste for material enjoyment. That's the thing. There's the example of this in the Bhagavatam with Jad Bharat, because in his one of his previous births, he'd been a king, and he went to perfect he left his kingdom as what the Kshatriyas were supposed to do. They were supposed to hand over the kingdom to their son, eldest son, and then go to the forest to perfect their spiritual life. And Maharaj Bharat did that, but somehow or other he became attached to a deer, as we all know. And because of that, because he thought of the deer at the time of death, he became a deer. But he didn't have the consciousness of the deer. But he made sure that when he was living in the forest, that he would associate, he would hear from the great sages. So in his next life, he became Jad Bharat. So he was very determined. he was given this spiritual intelligence that I'm not going to make the same mistake that I made in my... Because he could remember. He remembered his previous births. He says, I'm not going to make the same mistake. So he was determined that he wouldn't be distracted. So he acted like a deaf and dumb person. He didn't mind people thinking ill of him. His brothers, when his father passed away, his brothers ill-treated him. They gave him rotten food. He hardly had anything to wear. They would give him very hard work to do. He didn't mind at all because he was engaged in devotional service internally on the platform of the soul. And so he didn't mind what happened to his body. In fact, to the point where there were some dacoits came and they arrested him and they thought, he looks a good person that we can sacrifice. These were very low-class people who wanted to sacrifice him to Mother Durga, to the deity of Goddess Durga. So they took him to the temple and he didn't mind. Just imagine, what if I was a trace, right, we're going to... Actually, some people, when we talk about sacrifice, they think we sacrifice human beings or something like that. You know, they have this mad idea that we have. But, I mean, Jad Barra, he absolutely didn't pretend. He said, no, it's a body, it's just material elements, I don't mind. Of course, Goddess Durga didn't think like that. She knew that Jad Barra was a pure devotee, and she couldn't tolerate. This is a symptom of a Vaishnava. The Vaishnava, he doesn't mind what happens to himself. When he sees another Vaishnava being attacked or abused, then he acts on that. He defends it. So Durga, she cut off the heads of all these dacoits and saved Jad Barra. But he was completely satisfied internally. He was engaged in devotional service. So by the process of bhakti, Prabhupada says that the living entity is reinstated in his spiritual identity. So when we qualify to go back to the spiritual world, we get a spiritual body. We have a spiritual form. We are enabled to serve the Lord in any number of 5 different relationships. In neutrality, as a servant, as a friend, as a parent, and ultimately as a lover. All different shades of relationships that one can have with the Supreme Lord, and you have a form to go with that, an eternal form. So that's our constitutional position, is to be in the spiritual world with Krishna. We're all, that we are all part and parcel of Krishna, like sparks of a fire. But our dharma is service. It's either service in the spiritual world, where we serve Krishna directly, or we have service in the material world, where we serve the senses, or we serve other things. We serve our family, we serve a nation, we serve humanity, or whatever it is, like that. But the nature of the living entity, the dharma of the living entity is service, like that. So we're coming up to Gorpani now, so the appearance of Lord Chaitanya. And although we understand that Srila Prabhupada is very worshipable because he brought this Krishna consciousness to the West, and it's by his mercy it's been spread all over the world. Without Lord Chaitanya there'd be no Sankirtan movement. This is the yuga for the age, the yajna for the age, the congregational chanting of the holy name, and by his own example and by his teachings, Lord Chaitanya, he established this religion for the age of chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So Lord Chaitanya didn't leave many teachings. He left the Shastic and prayers. And I just want to read out one of these in English. The number 4, Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any numbers of followers. I only want your causeless devotional service, birth after birth. So here we have an idea of the mentality of someone who's spiritually advanced. They don't want wealth, they don't want sense enjoyment, they don't want a lot of followers. Even within the realms of spirituality, sometimes we may want to have followers. We want people to, we want to be a guru, we want to be this and that. But he says that I only want your courses, devotional service, birth after birth. In other words, he doesn't even want liberation. He doesn't want to go back to the spiritual world. In the beginning of Krishna consciousness, we have to desire to go back to Krishna, to go back to the Vaikuntha planets. But when we become very advanced, then we're only interested in pleasing Krishna. It could be in the spiritual world. It could be in the heavenly planets. It could be in Benwell. It could be in hellish planets. They don't mind where it is. They only want to perform devotional service, that's all. I was actually reading the Bhagavatam the other evening about the Prasetas, and there was a verse there where it's also said that the pure devotee, that he only wants to see that Krishna is pleased, that's all. And actually, he doesn't consider himself qualified even to go back to the spiritual world. So this is the type of consciousness, the type of humility that you see in somebody who is very advanced. Oh yes, or that they want to go back to Vaikuntha quickly. Sometimes you think, well, how can I get back there? I want to get out of the spirit. I want to get out of the material world. How can I get back there quickly? What's the short route? The short route is devotional service. The practice is devotional service. The training is devotional service, and the end is devotional service. And we have to try to establish that in our own consciousness. So Lord Chaitanya, he exemplified devotional service by his own behaviour. He was completely attached to chanting the holy name, to the point where he was mad almost. In the last 18 years of his life, he was just, completely in ecstasy and didn't care about any kind of social convention whatsoever. And of course, not only do we have his example, but we also have the example of his followers and their teachings, particularly the Goswamis, particularly Rupa Goswami, in that he's given us so many teachings, and we're very obliged to Srila Prabhupada that he's given us translations of the Nectar of Devotion and the Nectar of Instruction. How many people here have read the Nectar of Instruction? Everybody? So, Nectar of Instruction is an incredible book. It's such a short book, but there's so much in it. I mean, it gives you, we're talking about guidelines here, guidelines about pure devotional service. So in the Nectar of Instruction, Rupa Goswami, he gives what the qualifications are of a guru. He talks about things which are favourable, which are unfavourable in devotional service. He talks about the relationships that devotees have with one another. He talks about the glories of the holy name. He talks about the holy places like Govardhan Hill and Radhakan. What more can you need? Have it one small little book. Bhagavatam takes years to read, doesn't it? I mean, I read it maybe 3 or 4 times over the time, but even you reading it every day, it takes a long time to get through. And sometimes you can't remember what you've read. Some of these small books, Nectar of Devotion, Nectar of Instructions, they're gems, like that. They really give us a proper understanding. So there we are. So I'd like to finish there because I'm going on too long here. I'm 10 minutes over time. And I'd like to thank everybody for listening. And if anybody's got any thoughts on this, or any questions or comments, criticisms, corrections, I'll be glad to hear them. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.